booktube. And welcome to your Daily Penguin, our tour through my Penguin Classic wall, book by book, no 10 books at a time, not a normal shelf tour. And we are still working our way through, the Penguin wall is actually 3 bookcases, and we're working our way through the first one, which I organized a little while ago, at least roughly speaking. And that's what we're doing. We're still benefiting from that organization. That is not going to last for long. In fact, looking at the shelf, I think probably this week will be the end of that bookcase, and then we will be out and about, free to navigate. No idea what the next book will be. But today we are still firmly in the long Renaissance period. We have noticed that slowly over time our Daily Penguin has changed. We are no longer exclusively dealing with works in translation. And in addition to that, we're no longer dealing with books that come to us through the hair's breadth of survival, the happenstance of a text's provenance. That is less and less becoming an issue either. So we are moving into other areas of concern, like, for instance, editions, abridgments, and also, as in the case today, various scholarly apparatus, which will often be the only thing that will distinguish 2 different editions of an English language text. We won't have any more to wonder about which translation is better or which version of a text someone is using. Instead, it'll be a lot the question of how do you like the critical apparatus. And today we are dealing with Christopher Marlowe, the great playwright Christopher Marlowe. That is a Corpus Christi portrait that very likely is our playwright, or at least it's scholarly theorized to be. I think the evidence is fairly good that this is probably Christopher Marlowe. But this is an older Penguin Classic edition. This is from the 1960s, 1969, something like that. This is edited by J.B. Steane, Steane, and it contains the plays of Marlowe: Edward II, Dido, Queen of Carthage, Tamerlane the Great, the Jew of Malta, Dr. Faustus. And it contains a small amount of endnotes that explain those plays. And it has the editor's introduction, which is very spirited, very, very good. And this was the Penguin Classic Marlowe forever and ever. I had this in a mass market many, many times. I had it in a trade paperback many, many times. I've taught from it. It's an example of something that we've seen in your Daily Penguin many times, which is a good standard reprint volume of a canonical work, which I don't mean to belittle by describing it that way. It's just that sometimes in Penguin we will see something a little more than that. That is, it's a labor of Hercules to get that to happen, but it is nevertheless a fairly, in a way, easy thing to do. And it's much harder to curate a volume, to pull one together, to make it something really special, as opposed to something that is clearly meant to go out to schools. And this is that. This is that kind of book. It is clearly meant to go out to schools. It gives you a clear, annotated edition of the plays of this playwright. And those plays are amazing. They are amazing. It's easy for them to be overshadowed by the plays of Shakespeare. But I almost would agree with the famous scholar and public intellectual who said almost 100 years ago now that, and he was probably echoing what had been said before, that one of the main reasons that we study Shakespeare that we don't like to talk about is that we have a large number of his plays, and that if we had a large number of plays in really good shape from, for instance, Christopher Marlowe, the conception wouldn't be that there's this guy named Shakespeare who towers over the rest of all of literature. We wouldn't have that conception because if we had 30 plays from Marlowe, the idea goes. I'm not sure that I 100% agree with that, because we have a large body of work of playwrights that fall within 50 years of Shakespeare or earlier or later, and the large body of work doesn't save them from being anywhere near as good as Shakespeare. Marlowe is very nearly as good as Shakespeare. He lacks that particular Shakespearean magic of interiority, in my opinion, but his plays are still amazing to read. And Penguin did this edition for a long time, and then they came out with another one in the 2000s. This one, which you can see is bigger. And it is edited by Frank Romany and Robert Lindsay, and it includes all of the plays, but a lot more critical apparatus. The introduction is longer, but introductions are a matter of personality. But the critical apparatus, the actual explanation of the plays, is much, much greater in this book than in this one. You don't have, they have Dr. Faustus on the cover, you don't have the cutie patootie Christopher Marlowe. But aside from lacking the cutie patootie Christopher Marlowe, this is, it's difficult to say. There'll be an element of taste involved for everyone, but I think there's really no argument to be made that this is an improvement on the earlier version of Marlowe. It has a lot more in it. A lot more critical apparatus, which is what every successive generation of readers to this author need more and more of. This gives you more and more of that. It has a black and white cover of an illustration instead of something that is close to, probably, very likely, a face portrait of our author. That should always take precedence. But one way or another, if I had to choose, if I, for instance, were, God forbid, if I were to be back teaching a class on Renaissance literature and I wanted Marlowe to be on the syllabus, I would obviously use this thing as opposed to the earlier version. But you have a choice when you go to used bookstores, when you shop online. No, I shouldn't say used bookstores because we're all shopping online. But if you shop online for an edition of Marlowe, you will have a choice from Penguin of these two. Now that is the difference between them. This is a little more personality driven, a little more what's the word I want? I almost said by the numbers, but it's too good for that. This is more. This does more work to introduce Marlowe to you, to explain him to you. I myself believe, as I've said many times, that with especially classics in English, none of that should be necessary. What you really need to get Marlowe is the same thing as what you really need to get Shakespeare. And that's going to be tough to do in the age of a pandemic. What the ideal way, maybe someday it will be possible again, is to set aside a play. Pick Edward II or the Jew of Malta. And get together a group of friends. And parcel up the parts. And send people home with their parts so that they can study them and get to know them. You're still going to have the book open in front of you on your knee when you're doing a live read-through of the play. But you want to be familiar with it. Everybody would take their parts home and read through them, get to know them really well, say them out loud many times so that your mind and your mouth aren't tripping over anything. And then what you want over snacks and wine is to do a dramatic read-through of the play. I've recommended this on this channel many, many times for plays of any kind, but especially for plays that aren't quite in the modern idiom anymore. It's a little bit awkward to recommend this course of action now, because we can't really freely socialize with our friends anymore. But if you're trapped in a household with a group of people and the number is enough and people are willing, it's a fantastic amount of fun. I don't think people realize it. A lot of people, most of the people that I have put this idea to over the years, have never tried it. And it is a fantastic amount of fun. Just, I cannot recommend it strongly enough. So, and of course, the reason I bring it up is, like I said, that in my contention is that's all you really need. You don't really need textual elaboration at all. The textual elaboration will help a lot because a lot of times these authors are using words that aren't used anymore. A lot of times they're alluding to things that historical events or political events that the common reader won't know. But if your text, if your play relies on that, then you wouldn't be reading it anyway, or you shouldn't be. None of Marlowe's plays rely on that. Those things will shed a little light, but they won't improve the drama at all. The drama, the personal stuff, works anyway. And, oh my God, that's true 10 times over with Shakespeare. So I can't really recommend a communal read-along. What I wouldn't give for us to do that on BookTube. Oh my, what I wouldn't give. I think BookTube is one of the last holdouts online of people who haven't mastered multi-screen Zoom meetings. Zoom is actually, I've been looking into it. It is extremely easy to use. Extremely easy. And it's really easy to get a whole bunch of people together. And it's easy to record. It would be so much fun to do. And maybe not Shakespeare, that's a little bit much. But what if, imagine 6 of your favorite booktubers, plus me, doing a one-act play. Imagine that. Or doing an audiobook read-along of a an open copyright work. Wouldn't that be something? If we just divvied up speaking parts and did our own booktube audiobook, and we get one person to do the general narration, and then everybody else does the voices of the characters, so it'd be a novel. And for the general narration, we'd want someone who reads prose really, really well. So basically it would be Sean the Book Maniac or Olive in a book Olive. And then we would divvy up the voices. We'd divvy up the characters to everybody else. What fun that would be. Oh my. And we could do that with a Marlowe play. No Marlowe play has many speaking parts. But one way or another, that is your Penguin for today. It's two different editions of Marlowe. The one supersedes the other. The later one supersedes the earlier one in terms of scholarship, in terms of helping you out, introducing you to Marlowe. That isn't in any way meant to denigrate the earlier one. The earlier one is really good. The editor is really, really sparkling prose stylist on his own, so, or her own, whoever J.B. Steen is. So they both function very well as introductions to Marlowe. This functions slightly better as an introduction to Marlowe, and as an edition of Marlowe. Either one. If you're already familiar with Marlowe, if you don't need an introduction, either one of them will be just fine. I'm not 100% sure why I have both, but that's one of the reasons. It's one of the things this Penguin Classic tour is all about, is to help me get a better handle on my Penguin Classic. So I'm going to wrap this up for now. That is your Daily Penguin. We'll be back tomorrow. There's only a few books left. By the weekend, we will be out of this first bookcase. So I will reconvene then, and I'll see you. Thank you, BookTube.